The loan officer said it kindly, which somehow made it worse. He turned his monitor a few degrees, the way they do when the news is bad, and he told Priyanka that he was sorry, but he could not approve her for the car loan. And when she asked why, because that made no sense, because she had spent her entire adult life being careful with exactly this, he read her a number off the screen. Her credit score. It was more than 200 points lower than the last time she had checked it. And it was low the way a score gets low when someone has been very busy for a very long time. And Priyanka sat in that vinyl chair in the dealership finance office and felt the floor of her life quietly tilt. She was a nurse in a newborn intensive care unit, 34 years old, and she was, by any honest measure, one of the most careful people anyone who knew her had ever met. You do not last in that unit if you are not. She spent her nights standing over babies who weighed less than a bag of sugar, checking a dose 3 times before she gave it, reading a monitor for the one number out of place among a dozen, catching the small wrong thing before it became the big wrong thing. Carefulness was not a habit for her. It was who she was. And it was why the number on that screen was not just a financial problem. It was an insult to the whole architecture of her life. She did not cry in the finance office. She thanked the man, walked out to the car she had driven in on, the old one she had been hoping to replace, and sat in the parking lot with her hands on the wheel. And she did the thing she does at work when an alarm goes off and everyone else's heart rate spikes. She got very still and very slow. Panic, she had learned a long time ago on the unit, is a luxury you cannot afford when a life is on the line. So she breathed, and she told herself the same thing she told frightened parents at 3 a.m. We are going to find out exactly what is happening, one step at a time, and then we are going to deal with it. That night she pulled her full credit reports, all 3 of them, from the 3 big credit bureaus, and she sat at her kitchen table with the lamp on and read them the way she read a chart on a new admission, line by line, looking for the story in the data. And the story the data told her made her put her hand over her mouth. There were accounts on those reports she had never opened. Not 1 or 2. 7. 7 separate accounts in her name. Several credit cards, a couple of store lines, a personal loan, all opened over the past 14 months, most of them already maxed out and gone to collections. And there was more. A cell phone plan she had never signed up for. And a lease, an actual apartment lease, in her name, in a city 4 hours away, in a state she had visited exactly once. She sat with those reports for a long time that first night, and she did something that surprised even her. She made a list. Not of the accounts, not yet, but of what she actually knew for certain. Because that is how you steady yourself when the ground is moving. She knew her real accounts, the 2 cards and the checking she had opened herself over the years, and she circled them, small and honest, on the printout. Then she looked at the 7 strangers among them, and the phone, and the lease. And she understood that she was going to have to prove, item by item, to institution after institution, which parts of the document that claimed to be her life were actually hers. That is the peculiar cruelty of it. You do not just get robbed. You get put on trial for your own name. Someone was living as her. That was the thought that arrived fully formed at her kitchen table and would not leave. Somewhere out there, a stranger had her name, and her social security number, and her date of birth, and had used them to rent an apartment, turn on a phone, and borrow thousands upon thousands of dollars. All of it now curdling into debt and default and collections that were landing every bit of it on her. She was not looking at a mistake. She was looking at a person who had chosen her specifically and had been wearing her name like a coat for over a year while she stood over cribs on the night shift, never knowing. The first week was the worst, and Priyanka will tell you now that it was the closest she has come to feeling like she was losing her mind. Because the strange, awful thing about identity theft is that you are the one who has to prove you are you, over and over, to people who treat you like the suspect. She started calling the creditors, the ones whose accounts were on her report, to tell them the accounts were fraudulent, and she ran into a wall so smooth and so total that she understood quickly that the system was not built to help her. It was built to collect. The person on the phone did not want to hear that she was a victim. They wanted to know when she was going to pay. And the collectors were their own particular nightmare. They called at all hours because a maxed-out account in default is sold and resold to collection agencies, and each new one starts the calls fresh. And none of them knew or cared that the woman they were calling was a nurse who had never seen a dime of the money. One of them, on a night when she had just come off a brutal shift, a shift where she had held a baby through something no one should have to watch, was aggressive in a way that broke something in her. He implied, in that flat, threatening way they have, that they knew where she worked, that a debt like this could become a real problem for someone in her profession. And Priyanka, who does not scare easily, sat on her kitchen floor after that call and shook. It was the professional threat that got under her skin, because it touched the one thing she had built her whole life around. A nurse's license is her livelihood, her identity, the thing she went into debt and sleepless years of school to earn. And the implication that a stranger's fraud could somehow stain it landed like a hand around her throat. She found out later that the threat was mostly hollow, that a documented fraud victim's license is not at the mercy of a debt collector's bluff. But in that moment, on that floor, she did not know it. And the not knowing is exactly the weapon those calls are designed to be. They do not need the threat to be true. They only need you to be too frightened and too tired to check. There is a particular loneliness to those weeks that Priyanka thinks people who have not lived it cannot quite picture. The crime is invisible. There is no broken window, no missing television. Nothing a friend can look at and say, "Oh, how awful." There is only a woman who looks exactly like herself, walking around with the quiet, constant knowledge that somewhere a stranger is signing her name, and a stack of paper that everyone treats as her problem to prove away. She kept going to work, kept standing over the cribs, kept being the steady one for terrified parents, and then kept coming home to a kitchen table that had become a crime scene, with her own name on every piece of evidence. She told almost no one. That silence, she says now, was the heaviest part. And breaking it, first to Angela, was the beginning of getting free. The bank was the final insult. Her own bank, the one where she had banked since nursing school, where her paycheck landed every 2 weeks, where she had been a model customer for a decade. She went in person, and explained everything, laid the reports on the desk, and the man across from her was polite and sympathetic and utterly useless. He shrugged, essentially. He told her these things were very difficult, that identity theft cases could take a long time, that she should probably contact the credit bureaus, and he gave her a pamphlet. A pamphlet. She had come in bleeding, metaphorically, and they had handed her a brochure and wished her luck. That was the moment, she says, that the fear turned into something harder and more useful. That was the moment she stopped waiting for anyone to save her. Because here's the thing about Priyanka that the person wearing her name had failed to consider. They had stolen the identity of a woman who spends every working night doing the most methodical, unflinching, detail-obsessed work there is. They had assumed, the way these criminals assume about all their victims, that she would panic and flail and eventually just give up under the weight of it, the way so many people do, because fighting identity theft is exhausting and lonely, and the system makes you feel guilty for a crime committed against you. They did not know they had picked a woman who could keep a premature infant alive through a 12-hour shift by sheer refusal to miss a detail. That refusal was about to be pointed directly at them. She turned her small apartment into what she started calling, dryly to the one coworker she confided in, the war room. She bought a corkboard and a package of index cards and a set of colored pens, the same way she might set up to study for a certification. And she did the first smart thing, the thing that organized everything that came after. She stopped treating this as 7 separate disasters and started treating it as one case, a single investigation with a single subject. And she began, methodically, to build the file that would eventually be complete enough to hand to someone with a badge. The coworker was a woman named Angela, a charge nurse who had worked the unit even longer than Priyanka, and who had a way of making impossible nights survivable. When Priyanka finally broke down and told her what was happening, in the break room at 4 a.m. over bad coffee, Angela did not gasp or pile on with horror stories. She got the same, still, focused look she got when a code was called, and she said the thing Priyanka needed to hear, which was, "You are the most organized person I have ever worked with, and this thief has no idea what they just walked into." Then she said something Priyanka filed away without knowing how important it would become. She said a friend of hers, a respiratory therapist over at another hospital, had gone through some kind of credit nightmare a while back too, and had it ever gotten fixed, she was not even sure. Priyanka's mother called every few days from across the country, and those calls were their own kind of medicine and their own kind of ache. Her mother had raised her to be careful, had drilled into her the value of a good name and a paid bill, and there was a part of Priyanka that felt, irrationally, that she had failed some test, that she should have been careful enough to prevent even this. It took her weeks to understand, and longer to believe, that no amount of personal carefulness would have stopped what happened. Because the leak had not come from anything she did. It had come from a place she was required to trust. That distinction mattered to her more than almost anything, and it is why she is so fierce now about telling other victims the same words. This is not a thing you failed to prevent. This is a thing that was done to you. The foundation, she learned, the thing that turned her from a victim making frantic phone calls into a person with legal standing, was a document she had never heard of before that week. She went to the Federal Trade Commission's identity theft website, the official one, and she worked through it step by step, and at the end of it, she had what is called an identity theft report, an FTC affidavit, a sworn official statement that she was a victim of identity theft. That document, she discovered, was a key. Combined with the police report, which she filed next, sitting across from a patient detective and laying out her reports and her corkboard photos, it unlocked rights that the shrugging bank had never bothered to mention. With an identity theft report in hand, Creditors were legally required to take her seriously, to block the fraudulent information, to stop reporting it, to hand over records. That shift from begging to demanding was the psychological turning point of the whole ordeal for her. Before the affidavit, every phone call had been her, small and unproven, asking an institution to please believe she was a victim. After it, she was a documented victim, exercising specific legal rights, and the difference in how she carried herself into every interaction was total. She stopped apologizing. She stopped explaining herself as if she were the one who had done something wrong. She simply cited the report, cited the law, and stated what they were required to do. A nurse knows the power of standing on a protocol, and the identity theft report was a protocol, and she stood on it like solid ground. The police report itself almost did not happen the way it should, and Priyanka wants people to know this, because it is where a lot of victims give up. The first officer she reached, by phone, tried to wave her off, told her identity theft was really a matter for the credit bureaus, that there was not much a local department could do about accounts opened in another state. And the old Priyanka, the one from the finance office, might have accepted that. But the war room Priyanka had done her reading, and she knew that she had a right to a police report, that the FTC recommended it, that it mattered. So she went in person, politely, with a folder, and she did not leave until she had a report number. And the detective who eventually took it, a woman named Reyes, turned out to matter more to this story than either of them could have guessed that afternoon. Then came the freeze. And this is the piece Priyanka now tells every single person she meets. Co-workers, strangers, the parents of her tiny patients when the moment is right. She placed a credit freeze with all 3 credit bureaus. A freeze locks your credit file so that no new account can be opened in your name, because a lender cannot pull a frozen file, and no legitimate lender opens an account without pulling the file. It is free, it takes a few minutes, and it is the single most powerful thing a person can do to protect themselves. And almost nobody does it until after they have been robbed. The freeze did not undo the damage already done, but it slammed the door. Whoever had been opening accounts in her name for 14 months could not open another one. For the first time, the bleeding stopped. She did not stop at the freeze, because a careful person never does only one thing. She set fraud alerts as well. And she went further and thought about the other doors a thief with her full information might try, the ones people forget. She contacted the tax authorities about the risk of a fraudulent tax return filed in her name for the refund, a common next move. She checked whether any medical care had been billed under her insurance, another quiet vector for someone with a stolen medical worker's details. She changed passwords and turned on every extra layer of login security she could find on her real accounts. She was not being paranoid. She was doing triage, closing every door in the house one by one, because she had learned the hard way that the people who had her file did not think small. And she started monitoring, deliberately and permanently, in a way she never had before. She learned to read her own credit reports on a schedule the way she read a chart, watching for anything new, anything wrong, any small number out of place. The woman who had gone years without checking, assuming her carefulness was armor enough, became a woman who would never again be surprised, because she understood now that surveillance of your own name is not distrust of the world. It is just basic maintenance, like checking the batteries in a smoke alarm. You do not do it because you expect a fire. You do it because the cost of the one time you are wrong is everything. With the door shut behind her, she turned to the long, grinding work of cleaning up what was already inside the house. This is the part the pamphlet made sound simple, and that is, in fact, a war of attrition, and Priyanka fought it the way she does everything, one methodical step at a time. And she documented every single move. For every one of the 7 accounts, and the phone plan, and the lease, she sent a dispute, in writing, certified mail, keeping the receipts, citing her identity theft report, and the law. She disputed the fraudulent accounts with the credit bureaus and demanded they be blocked. She contacted each creditor directly and invoked her right, under federal law, to receive copies of the actual application records, the documents the thief had submitted to open the account in her name. She kept a spreadsheet, of course she did, a single master log with a row for every account and a column for every step, the date she sent the dispute, the certified mail tracking number, the date of the response, the outcome, the next action. Anyone who saw it would have thought it was a nurse's chart. And in a way it was, because she treated her stolen identity like a patient she was determined to bring back. Some nights, after a double shift, the last thing she wanted was to sit down at that corkboard and write another certified letter. And she made herself do it anyway. 1 letter, 1 account, before she let herself sleep. Progress in a case like that is invisible for a long time, and the temptation to quit lives in that invisibility. And she beat the temptation the only way it can be beaten, by refusing to measure success in feelings and measuring it only in completed steps. The responses trickled back over weeks, and each one was a small negotiation with an institution that would much rather she went away. Some creditors, faced with a proper identity theft report and the law, folded quickly and correctly. Others stalled, demanded more, sent her in circles, and for those she had a next move ready every time, because she had read the rules and knew what they were required to do. She was polite in every letter, unfailingly, and she was also completely immovable. And that combination, the calm and the refusal to disappear, turned out to be the thing that wore them down. It is very hard to brush off a person who is never rude and never leaves. And it was in those records, the ones the shrugging bank and the aggressive collectors had never wanted her to see, that the case cracked open. Because Priyanka did not just file the disputes and wait. She read what came back. She laid the application records for all 7 accounts side by side on her kitchen table under the lamp, the way she would compare a week of a baby's vitals, looking for the pattern. And the pattern was there, and it was chilling. The applications did not just use her social security number. They used her correct middle name, her real date of birth, her actual nursing license number on the ones that asked for employment, and an old address, an address she had lived at years ago when she first started at the hospital. That old address was the thread, and Priyanka pulled it. Whoever had done this did not have a stray copy of her social security number from some random breach. They had a complete, accurate, detailed file on her. The kind of file that includes your professional license and your employment history. The kind of file that does not come from a stolen wallet. It came from somewhere that had all of it in one place. And as she sat there with the application spread out, a cold understanding settled over her. The same cold clarity she felt when a monitor shows her a number that means something is wrong deep inside a tiny body. This had come from inside her own professional world. Someone with access to nurses' records had handed her whole self to a stranger. She took that theory to Detective Reyes, and she did not just take a theory, because a theory is easy to dismiss. She took the applications, the matching details highlighted, the old address that tied them together, and her written timeline of every account and when it was opened. And Reyes, who had taken a lot of identity theft reports and seen a lot of them go nowhere, looked at what this nurse had assembled and got quiet. And then she asked Priyanka a question that changed the whole scale of the thing. She asked whether Priyanka knew any other nurses at her hospital or elsewhere who had had something like this happen. And Priyanka, who had told her story to exactly one trusted coworker, suddenly remembered that the coworker had said months ago that a friend of hers, a respiratory therapist, had been dealing with some kind of credit nightmare too. Priyanka went back to Angela that week and asked her, gently, to reach out to her respiratory therapist friend. And the friend, it turned out, had been through almost the identical nightmare. Accounts opened across state lines using her full and accurate professional details, and had eventually just eaten some of the damage because she did not have the time or the will to fight all of it. When Priyanka heard the specifics, the accuracy of the applications, the professional license numbers, the old addresses, she felt that cold clarity settle over her again, sharper this time. 2 nurses and a respiratory therapist, all medical workers, all with complete and accurate files stolen, all hit the same way. That was not 3 unlucky individuals. That was a pattern, and a pattern has a source. That was the moment the case stopped being one woman's private disaster and became something else. Because Reyes had been seeing them too, scattered across different reports, different jurisdictions, and had never had the one thing that would connect them, which was a victim organized enough to have preserved the application records and spotted the common thread. Priyanka's corkboard, her certified mail receipts, her side-by-side applications with the highlighted nursing license numbers, was not just going to clear her name. It was the map. It showed that the victims were all medical workers, that their complete professional files had been compromised, and that the applications for all their 2-state spread kept routing back through a handful of connected points that a detective with a subpoena could follow. The source, when the investigation ran it down, was exactly the kind of quiet, boring vector that real identity crime actually flows through. Not a hooded figure in a dark room, but a weak link in the plumbing of ordinary life. A third-party company that handled credentialing and background paperwork for medical staffing. A vendor that hospitals and agencies across 2 states sent their nurses and therapists complete files to, had been compromised. An insider with access, working with people on the outside, had been quietly selling complete medical worker identities, the full package, name and number and license and history. The reason those applications had been so accurate that they sailed through approval. The victims have been chosen for a reason. Medical workers have steady incomes and good credit, and are busy and exhausted, which to a certain kind of criminal reads as the perfect mark. Priyanka learned, through Reyes, a little about how these rings actually operate, and it stripped away the last of the shame, because there was nothing personal in it at all, which is its own strange horror. The people who wore her name had never met her, never thought about her, did not care that she was a nurse or a daughter or a person who stood over dying babies at 3 a.m. To them, she was a clean profile, a high-quality product, a set of true facts worth a certain price because those true facts sailed through credit checks. That impersonal quality is what makes it feel so violating, and also what makes it, in the end, beatable, because a machine that processes people as data can be fought with better data. And Priyanka had better data than anyone. Priyanka's file became a spine for the case. Her timeline established dates. Her preserved application records tied specific fraudulent accounts to the compromised data. Her methodical documentation of every dispute and every response showed the pattern of how the ring operated. The same types of accounts, opened the same way, in the same clusters of cities, up and down the interstate corridor where the staffing vendor did business. She had built, without meaning to, without any training in it, exactly the kind of organized evidentiary record that investigators dream of and rarely get, because most victims are too overwhelmed to do anything but panic and plead. The resolution on the criminal side was not a movie either, and Priyanka would be the first to tell you that. It was warrants and forensic accounting and the slow machinery of a multi-jurisdiction investigation, and it took the better part of a year. But it worked. The insider at the credentialing vendor and several people in the ring were identified and charged. The stolen data pipeline was shut down. The vendor, exposed, was forced to notify every affected medical worker and to overhaul its security, and the notification itself became a small mercy, because it meant hundreds of other nurses and therapists who did not yet know they were compromised got the warning in time to freeze their own credit before the coat was ever worn. That ripple is the part that still moves Priyanka most when she lets herself think about it. Somewhere out there were hundreds of people exactly like her. Medical workers who trusted a paperwork company because they were required to, who had no idea their complete selves were sitting in a criminal's inventory, waiting to be sold. Most of them would never know how close they had come, and would never know the name of the tired nurse whose corkboard and certified letters and refusal to quit had helped pull the thread that got them warned in time. She did not do it to be a hero. She did it to clear her own name. But that is often how it goes, that the thing you do to save yourself, done thoroughly enough, ends up quietly saving people you will never meet. She thinks, too, about the victims who did not fight. The respiratory therapist who ate part of the loss. The untold others who got a letter like hers and cried and walked away and let the debt sit on their names because the system had made it feel hopeless. She does not judge them, not for a second, because she knows exactly how heavy it is, and how alone you feel, and how the institutions you turn to hand you a pamphlet and a shrug. That is precisely why she talks about it now, loudly, to anyone who will listen. Every person she convinces to freeze their credit tonight is one fewer clean profile for the next ring to sell, and one fewer exhausted human being sitting on a kitchen floor at midnight, shaking, being made to prove they are themselves. On Priyanka's own side, the cleanup finished the way these things finish when you do them right, which is slowly, and then all at once. One by one, with the identity theft report, and the police report, and the certified letters, and the law on her side, the fraudulent accounts were blocked and deleted. The lease 4 hours away was cleared. The phone plan was closed. The collectors, one after another, were forced to stand down as the debts were confirmed as fraud and removed. Her credit score, that number that had tilted the floor of her life in a dealership finance office, climbed back, month by month, to where her real, careful decade of life had earned it. The stranger who had worn her name was made to take it off. It did not happen in a single triumphant instant, and Priyanka wants people to understand that. Because the movies lie about this, and the lie makes real victims feel like failures. There was no phone call where an executive apologized and made it all disappear. There was a Tuesday when the last fraudulent account finally dropped off her report, and she noticed it almost by accident, checking her file the way she now always did. And she just sat there for a moment, and let it land. No confetti, no villain on their knees, just a clean report that finally said, in the language of the institutions that had doubted her, that she was who she had always been. She made herself a cup of tea and went to bed, because she had a shift the next night. And babies do not care what your credit report says. And there was something healing in that, too. Here is what happened next, and it is the part Priyanka is proudest of. Prouder than the cleared credit. Prouder even than her file becoming the spine of the case. She could not let it go. The sheer number of her colleagues who had no idea they were exposed, and no idea how simple the protection was. So she started teaching. Informally at first, on her unit, catching coworkers on breaks, telling them to freeze their credit tonight, right now, on their phones. It is free. It takes 5 minutes. Do it before you clock out. Then formally, when her hospital, aware of the vendor breach, asked her to help put together a session for staff. The nurse who had turned her kitchen into a war room became the person who stands at the front of a break room full of exhausted medical workers and hands them, in plain steps, the door-slamming power she had learned the hard way. There is a night Priyanka thinks about when people ask her how she got through that year, and it has nothing to do with credit reports. It was during the worst of it, the war room weeks, when she was running on no sleep and pure will. She was on shift, and there was a baby, a tiny fighter who had been with them for weeks, whose parents drove 2 hours each way to sit by the crib. And that night the baby turned a corner, hit a milestone the whole unit had been holding its breath for. And Priyanka stood there at 2 a.m, wrung out and half robbed of her own name, watching this small, stubborn life win. And she thought, this is who I am. Not the number on the screen. This. A person who stands over the small and the vulnerable and refuses to let the wrong thing happen quietly. She went home that morning and attacked her own case with exactly that. That is the thread that ran through all of it. The reason a NICU nurse was, without knowing it, one of the worst possible people for that ring to have chosen. They picked her because they thought medical workers were soft targets, busy and tired and unlikely to fight. They got that exactly backward. The same person who will not miss a detail on a monitor at 3 a.m. will not miss a detail on a credit report at her kitchen table. The same patience that keeps a 2-pound infant alive through a long night is the patience that documents every account, preserves every application, and builds the timeline that hands a detective a ring instead of a shrug. Carefulness, it turns out, is not a soft thing. In the right person, it is the hardest thing there is. Priyanka bought her car eventually, once her credit had healed. A sensible, reliable one, paid for with a loan she qualified for easily. And she drove it off the lot from the same dealership where the floor had first tilted. She did not make a scene about it. She just signed her own name on her own paperwork with her own good credit, which after everything felt like the most triumphant, ordinary act of her life. She keeps her credit frozen to this day, unfreezing it for a minute only when she needs it. And she has convinced more coworkers than she can count to do the same. If you take one thing from this story, take the thing Priyanka wishes someone had told her before that finance office. Freeze your credit. Tonight. It is free, and it is the closest thing there is to a lock on the front door of your financial life. And almost nobody does it until after the break-in. And if the worst has already happened, know that you are not helpless, and you are not alone, and it is not your fault. There is a whole set of rights and tools built for exactly this. The FTC affidavit, the police report, the disputes, the freeze. and they work. But only if you refuse to be the easy target the thief was counting on. Be careful. Be methodical. Keep every record. The system is slow, but it is real, and it will work if you make it. So here is the question Priyanka leaves people with when she finishes a break room session. And I will leave it with you. Have you frozen your credit? Yes or no? Honestly. And if not, what is stopping you from doing it before this video ends? And for those of you who have been through something like this, how long did it take you to feel like yourself again after someone wore your name? Tell us below, and tell us where you are listening from tonight, your state, and your age. Because somebody scrolling past needs to hear that they can take their name back. If this one meant something to you, a like and a subscribe help these stories reach the people who need them. And I will see you in the next one.